Okay, so where I've been at over the last few weeks is I've been sort of digging through Dagger and just having a look at it because I'm excited about the project. I think it's really good. I love the idea of being able to use code to define pipelines, which I think are becoming more and more complex. Well, I don't think they're becoming more and complex. I know they're becoming more and more complex. We're trying to do more and more things with pipelines. Our builds are becoming more complex. We've got varying dependencies. There's a lot of sort of imperative nature because we're doing multiple sort of different types of builds, and we've got to do different sort of, like, for example, if I'm building a binary for Linux, I might want to push it to apt. If I'm doing some stuff for macOS, and then I've got to get it signed with Notary. You know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I've got to do, which is dependent upon the platform, and there's a whole load of conditionals in there. And one of the things that I've felt when I've been working on really complex builds is that the first thing is that YAML just is it's fair enough, you know, it's descriptive, but the problem with YAML is that it's not a programming language. It's you know, it's like a configuration language. So the things like if statements, things like loops, imperative nature like that doesn't exist in YAML. So you end up sort of having to, when you're writing it, you're building it, and you're kind of like taking, you know, no shade on GitHub Actions. I think it's great, but like you have these like if statements, which are kind of built into the YAML, and they're then evaluated and processed somewhere in the back end. Or you've got like matrices and things like that instead of loops. And it just feels really weird, and it's just really difficult to test. I've spent a huge amount of time debugging failed builds just because I have to kick it off. I've got no way of really monitoring it other than watching it fail and looking at log output, or if I'm lucky, SSHing into a machine. Because I'm trying to do something complex, which something wasn't designed to. So Dagger like really hit a nerve with me from that regard. Because the first thing that I can run it anywhere, which means that I can test it and debug it locally. But secondly, because I can use code to do so. Now, there's been a few sort of things that when I've been kind of looking through this, and I think the first thing that I've kind of came to the conclusion of is that, you know, not all builds are the same. So you've got to think about how you go about controlling those conditionals. So be that your encoding your branch-based logic into Dagger, or whether you're passing in some flags to your Dagger build. But, you know, something like deployment. Now, if I'm testing this locally, I don't necessarily want to go through and do the deployment every time. So or if I'm on a different branch, I maybe don't want to deploy, or if it's just a sort of a standard build and not a merge. So like having that logic there is super important. The second thing, which I think is which is really interesting, is not doing what I've done here. So what I've done here is I've kind of just taken a very, you know, stick it on the page in the flow that it should go kind of approach as I've been working through and building this. And what I've got is something which is, well, it's quite unreadable. I mean, it's not that bad, but, you know, like it doesn't sort of form the standard sort of Go idioms of nicely sort of structured, maybe smaller bite-size approach. And I did that because I wasn't thinking about application code and pipelines, building it as a programming language and using the programming language. I was just kind of using it brute force. And that's my own laziness. But I think I'll show you in a moment what I'm kind of coming to terms with. But I think it's really important that you think about how you structure your builds, because I think Dagger does an amazing job. But, you know, even simple things like just putting them into functions, like, can anybody tell me where my application build starts and ends? I mean, it's kind of here, right? But you've got to look at it, and then that kind of brings you straight into the sort of the programming thing that, you know, write once, read many, many times. Exactly the same problem in YAML. What I love about Dagger is I can now extract that out into a package. I can now create a common build element. I can now just call it as a function. I can be descriptive. That's excellent. The other thing that I've kind of found is you learn to love Dagger's built-in graph and work with that. The ability to do something like this, where I can do a build, then I can get that build folder, and then I can just reuse that build folder in another container is fantastic. I don't have to write anything to the disk. That means I don't have to clean anything up. Everything is kind of managed inside of the cache, which is going to kind of be fast and reproducible. And yeah, it's kind of a much nicer approach from when I first came with kicking the tires. I'm like, oh, I'll write this to the disk and I'll pick it up. And you know, if you don't need the file, don't write it. And I think the other thing which I've found, which I genuinely have a lot of love for, which I'm going to use more and more and more, is this approach. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a container. My base is Alpine. I'm mounting my build binaries into there. I'm running a container exec, which is just copying a file. Then I'm setting an entry point and I'm doing a publish. Now, that's exactly the same as this Docker file here. But I don't need to have that Docker file anymore. This is brilliant. I really, really like this. And I really like this for a number of reasons. One is that it means I can be programmatic about my Docker files, which I do like. You know, I like this format, but now it's so much easier to again bake conditionals into Docker files. But I think what's super important about this is you can unit test that. That block of code there is 100% unit testable, which means that you're now able to write unit tests for your Docker files, which is sick, right? And then again, I'm just kind of doing, you know, very, very similar things, but I think structuring, and I don't think this code is perfect. That's my point. I think structuring things and the way that you lay out your code and like a style guide is quite important, because it's the readability is the key thing, I think, for me, and it's something that I very much like. So that's kind of where I'm at, right? Like, so after a couple of weeks of playing around, what I have here is a production pipeline that will do my build, and it will deploy it to DigitalOcean, and it works great. Now, where I'm kind of at the moment is I'm looking at this and I'm going, well, if you sent me that as a code review, I might advise you do some things to it to make it a little bit more sort of readable. That's no fault of Dagger. That's every fault of Nick Jackson. So where I'm kind of at right now is looking at how to kind of structure pipeline code to make it as clear and as understandable as possible. And check. Yeah. And this is where I'm almost at. So I'm thinking about how to kind of to do this. So I think the first thing is that my apply stage is now, you know, much clearer. I can read what's going on. So I'm generating the credentials, I'm building the application, and I'm packaging the application. There's kind of no, if I don't need to know anymore, I don't need to know anymore. I've got a very high level view of what's going on. What I'm not doing is I'm not putting my conditionals in here. So I'm not saying if, I don't know, app error, you know, something like that, not equal nil, blah, right? So if there's an error occurred, don't do this. I'm not doing that. And I'm saying that, for example, if the error is the error is nil, build it, oh gosh. And let's say if, well, I have a flag for do deploy. So if there's no error and do deploy flag is set, then package the application. I am not writing code like that. And I'm not doing that deliberately, even though that's probably the most idiomatic go way to do it, because I think that, and this is a personal opinion, I think that hurts the readability. So what I've done, which I think is something I'm just playing around with, is I've built a little class. Come on, computer. And the class I built is just called params. And all this does is it has some helper functions on it. So I've just added some helper functions, like my context is on here. My logging is on here. I've got some help functions, which is like log start. So I can kind of create consistent messages and only kind of log pertinent information. And if I fail, I'll give more verbose information. Has error and cancelled. So I'm going to use context, and you can generate the context with a timeout and stuff. So in the application now, for something like build application, I'm kind of, it doesn't look much different, but what I'm doing here is I'm not returning any errors. Now, if there is no error that can run in build application, but for example, in package application, well, at the start of package application, what I'm doing is I'm checking if build is canceled, and that's basically doing an indirection to say if the context is canceled. So that could be because of a timeout. It could be because of anything like that. And then I'm doing my thing. If I have an error, I will call build.log error. Now, internally, build.log error will cancel the context. So whenever I go to deploy my application, now I'm going to say, well, if the do deploy flag is set, if the build has got an error, return, and then I've got my context. And I think by kind of by doing those kind of little restructures, it's giving me sort of some code which is way easier to kind of understand, and it follows, well, I think better coding principles. And the next step, as I say, is unit testing this, because I firmly believe that all of this is unit testable. And I'm just generally excited about where things go. And I think this is fantastic, that the very fact that I can just run this locally in my build, everything will, well, it's going to fail, but because I've got a bug, I was just refactoring this earlier. But the fact that this can then be pushed up to GitHub Actions when I check in, and exactly the same process is going to run. I mean, that's really nice. So a little bit of work to do around that, but it's just kind of my thoughts right now, where I think I'm at, and very much enjoying what's going on. So thank you so much, Dagger team, for the great work that you're doing. If anybody's got any questions about kind of any things, then I'm more than happy to try and answer.
I have one about the unit testing. What would you unit test on this part? Is it, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. So there's like there's an argument, I think the first thing is that wherever you use an if statement, you should write a unit test. Wherever there's conditional logic, that should carry a unit test. I suppose there's a small argument that you could kind of test the build container. So for example, I've got an error here. Well, I should be testing that I'm correctly catching errors. You could do things like testing that you're kind of setting the environment variables. It feels like you're writing code twice, but at the same time, it can also catch you from silly mistakes. I think things like that. I mean, this is a very straightforward build, but like by the time I kind of enhance that out, looking at things like creating a GitHub release, which is going to be part of that, like all of those things, I think it's worth it's worth testing. Predominantly, like you're writing code. It's anything you would unit test in your code. I think you should unit test in your Go pipelines as well, or your TypeScript or your Python pipeline.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
On the secret handling, I noticed, actually it's a question for Nick and the core devs also, that the way the token is passed in, is that the way we want it to be used? And if not, you know, what's the alternative? Because I think there's a whole API around creating secrets.
Yeah.
They can also just pass the value of the secret in plain text. I think you might be using like a way that works, but maybe doesn't fully leverage secret management. I'm not 100% sure either, because I just glanced at it.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. I've seen the secret stuff in the API, and it's been one of the things that I'm curious to dig into. One of the reasons, so I'm using environment variables here, and the reason for using the environment variables was when I was pushing this pipeline to GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions allows you to have the, you know, like the, well, you basically say that a secret is available for this particular step. And then you can either use that through their interpolation to, for example, it could be a parameter. The other way is that you can just use it to set an environment variable. And the reason I was using that is because I've actually got those those secrets in my envarc file, which I've got locally. So from a running perspective, it gives me a really kind of like, you know, it's just consistent. I don't need to do anything different. But I think like I really want to, I do want to look at the secrets API, because I think that could be really cool. Because the thing about secrets as well is like, I don't really want them in my envarc. Like it would be cool to be automatic. You know, I should be able to just, whether you're pulling them from Vault, CyberArk, from GKE Secret Store, or AWS Secret Manager or something like that. I think that could be a really cool integration.
Yeah, so I think, so at the moment we don't have that actually, although we talk about it a lot because we do want it. The only thing we have at the moment is environment variables. It's just that I think there's a way to do it to avoid some
Thread leakage.
Yeah,
nice.
So specifically
yeah.
the cache, I think. But I'm
Oh,
realizing
cool.
now, seeing your code, you know, it's hard to, I mean, it's literally the simplest and most intuitive way is what you're doing. I mean, it's intuitive, I guess, by definition, because you found it intuitively, but it's, I mean, I guess we can open a PR and look at the diff together or something, but I'm just wondering if the right now, the cost for a little bit more security,
it's 100% worthwhile. And I think like, I mean,
I'm just worried if we can make it simpler, basically.
Yeah. So I think like from my perspective, I didn't even think about that. And it's a really good call, because it's a potential risk, right? Like, I mean, if this is a public repo, and my build crashes, and for whatever reason something gets spewed out into the log which contains my AWS creds or my DigitalOcean token, that's not a good place to be in. So I think it would, I'm definitely going to check that out, because I think even if it is a bit more important, I'm wondering, like, actually, I'm just trying to think how you could even, like, that, you almost want that in like font 170 point flashing red with a paisley background, warning, please use secrets. I'm gonna have a look at that. That's a really good one. I'm going to do a stream on Sunday, I think, where I'm going to kind of try and look at doing some more refactoring and playing around, and I'm going to kick the tires on secrets on Saturday afternoon.
That would be very, very useful
to
see your thoughts, because it's like, we think of it as a first incremental step, And we know there's more, but we didn't want to overwhelm either.
Yeah. I mean, what I'd love to see around stuff like that is like if you could build a generic secrets API, and then I could build a plugin for that generic secrets API, that would be amazing, because then you've got the ability as well, if you could do those like almost like a hot swap based on environment. So if I'm running locally, it might just pick my secrets from Manvras. If I'm running in GitHub, then it could pull them out of the GitHub secrets, or as I say, AWS Secret Manager or something like that. That could be really incredible, because the user experience is exactly the same no matter where you run. It's kind of like based on the plugin which handles the environmental differences. That could be cool.
Yeah, I know, and Andrea was describing this. I mean, that's one of the things we're seeing also. That would be awesome. Completely agree.